All right, so the agenda for this video is to give you an idea on how to create a Node.js backend application using Express, which is the de facto standard for creating Node.js backend applications. Create a couple of dummy endpoints for APIs, uh, how you can what are cores, how you can handle them, how you can add logs in your server. So for example, someone hits an API endpoint, you can see those logs in your server. And just just give you a basic overview as to what are some terminologies that people used while creating a backend Node.js Express application, or for that matter, any backend application. So let's just get to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create up a folder called Express app. I have this folder which I called as an Express app. What I'm going to do is uh, I'm going to say npm init dash y, and as soon as I hit enter, what this will do is it will create a empty package JSON for me so that I can install packages. And then what I can do is I simply come here and install, do an npm I cores express morgan nomon dash dash save. And once I do that, that is it. Now all I need is to go in my Express app and create a file called server.js. I'll import some packages. I'll import this thing called HTTP. I didn't install this because this comes pre-built into Node.js, so you don't have to install it. Next, I'm going to say Express because we are trying to create up an Express application. Morgan required. All right. And the other was oh sorry, cores require cores. Then what I will do is I'll create an Express instance. I'll come here, HTTP server, create server. I'll pass in my app instance. Then I'll do HTTP dot on. Oh, all right, sorry. So I'll create up a server, const server, and then I'll just do server dot on, and it has these events. I'm going to select listening, and I'm going to say console.log listening on port. What should be the port? I'm going to come up here. I'm going to say port is equal to 3000, and let's see if this works. All I'm going to do is in my terminal right here, I'm going to come up and say I'm already in my Express app. So, and my server.js app is right inside my Express app. So I'm going to go and type node server.js. And does it give me an error? It didn't do anything. Const app, and then if I have an app.set port listening server listen. Oh, all right. So server listen, we have to also make it listen on a port for some reason. Let's restart our server. All right, so it says listening on port 3000. So up till now, what we have done is we've created up an Express application. We have not used Morgan and Chorus till now. I'll add them in a bit. We're using the HTTP and Express module. Express package is used to initialize an app instance. This app instance is going to be the gist of everything as we move forward. And then what we do is from our HTTP method that comes built in into Node.js, we use the create server method. We pass in this app instance for Express, and we create a server. We make sure that the server is listening on a port. That port is 3000, can be anything. And then this we add a method for server.on, which has this event called listening. As soon as it starts listening on a particular port, it's just going to console.log this particular message that we've added here. And that is it. We've not done a lot here. So let's do a little bit more. I'm going to take my app and I'm going to say, all right, use course. So what our course basically, well, now imagine that you have an application and that application is, you have a backend application and the domain for that backend application is, for example, uh, backend.com slash three colon 3000, and the front end application that is, or your mobile application that is trying to connect to that backend application is somewhere hosted on, I don't know, uh, abc dot Google, abc.facebook.com. So Facebook's domain is trying to access Google's domain. That won't work because browsers have enabled this security policy that ensures that the only API that a front-end application can hit are the ones that are in their own domains. So Facebook should have a domain called backend.facebook.com, frontend.facebook.com. So they're both into the same domain. Now, most of the cases, it's not, because your backend is on a different instance and your front end is on a different instance with different domains. So what Course will do is Course tells the server, as soon as this front end application that is on a Facebook domain tries to hit a backend endpoint, which is hosted on uh, google.com subdomain, as soon as it comes there on the server, app.useCourse will make sure and tells the browser that is trying to hit that API endpoint is, it's okay, I'm allowing for my data to be accessed to another subdomain. That is all it does. I hope that was clear. If it's not, I will attach up a MDN documentation explaining what course is and what it does. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say app.use Morgan, and I'm going to say log all of those things in a dev mode. And that should be pretty much it. All right, so we've added cores, we've added Morgan, but we're not actually using them at the moment. Let's make sure that we're using them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come and app.use. I'm going to create up my first route. It's going to be the base route. It takes in two arguments, the route name and then a function. The function takes in three parameters: request, response, and next. I'll just talk about request and response for for this video, but this is a series of videos, and I will talk about next when I talk about middlewares. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say return response. So as soon as you hit my API endpoint, I want to make sure that I return a response in a certain way. So I want to return my response with a status 200 and a JSON message that says success, true, message, job well done. All right. So I'm just going to go up in my Postman. I'm going to select this get, type in localhost colon 3000 as the base route, and I'm going to say send. All right, so we just created our first API endpoint. That was nice. That was easy. All right. So, but generally, imagine a backend application. It has more than 50 or 100 routes. Even if it has tens, right now what I'm only doing is I'm just setting up a status and just returning a message. But most generally, as soon as you hit an API endpoint, a lot of things happen. You validate the user's input if he send anything in the request bodies payload. You make a database operation, whether it's creation, updation, simply reading, or just deleting. All of that, those code can come up, can pile up and load up your server.js file. So what we will do here is we will create up another file called, I'll call it route. All right, so I'll call this file, I'll create a folder called routes, and I'll create a file called, I don't know, index.js. Index.js doesn't sound that good, so I'll just call this user.js. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to require express inside this folder, and I see that I missed something here. It was in is equal to signs. All right. Next, I'm going to say, all right, let's create up a router. I'm going to say express dot router, and then I'm going to say router dot get. Same thing. I'm just going to come up here and copy this entire thing, and then I'm going to go module dot exports is equal to router. Now what I can do here is whatever my base route is, I'm going to come up at the top a little bit here. I'm going to say I'm going to put a comment here and say list of all available routes, import user router from routes/user, and let's see if this works. So what I've done is I've set up that use my app instance and dedicate this backslash route to this user router. And inside that user router, I've set up another backslash route. I'll talk about this a little bit more. And I've just took all of my methods here from the server.js method and I've moved it to the user.js method. And I'll just hit save. I'll restart my server. Import user. Ah, silly me. Require. All right. So it's listening on port 3000, and hopefully everything should still work. It still does. It still does work. So we have a get route. Let's create up a another route. This is also going to be a get route with an ID. Request, response, next. And I'm just going to copy this just for the sake of it. Job well done. And instead of this, I'm going to use backticks here. Backticks are super cool. It lets you have these fancy variables inside. Now I'm going to go and say, ID request dot params. All right. So I have a base route and I have another route which takes in this ID parameter. Now ID is something that whatever I will type, just ahead of my backslash URL is going to take that and it's going to sign into this object called request.req.params.id. I'm destructuring that here. I'll make sure that I will attach a link to destructuring and what it is in the description below. And all I'm doing is I'm taking the response status, setting it to 200 and returning a JSON message. I'll restart my server. All right, sorry. And I will come here and I'll say Adil Imran, which is my name. It says job well done, Adil Imran. Or I will just come up here and say Pikachu because that's my favorite Pokemon. So it says job well done, Pikachu. All right, so let's talk about some of the terminologies. This is going to be our root file. Root file is basically the index.js file for your backend application from where your application will bootstrap. This section is called a router. So we've just created a router. Another thing that is usually done, because obviously this file can load as well. You can have uh, a lot of routes here as well. So for example, you have a base route. You can also have another, I don't know, a user route, uh, an admin route. You can have, I don't know, a systems route. And right now they're pointing to the same thing. So for example, if I was to, for example, use this user router and go here and say user slash the ID that I just created, and if I do this, it should still work. Imagine you have these sets of routes that can grow a lot, and then for each route you have a dedicated function which can also expand and bloat your route file. So for that, what people usually do is they create these things called controllers, which I will do just now. So this was my user router, and since I'm not even using this, I'll just come up here, delete this because this was supposed to be a user router. This was not supposed to be a slash a core index router. I will just come up here. I'll create up a new file. I'll call it controllers slash user.js, and then I will just say module dot exports. Just bear with me, guys. I'll just call it get all get all, and then I'll copy this as well, and I'll call this get by ID. Module dot exports. No, what I can even do for the head, I can do user controller is an object, has get all, get by ID, and then I can just come at the bottom, say module dot exports user controller, go back in my routes, and probably let's just import the controller. Const user controller require user. I will take all of this, get all. I will take all of this, get by ID, and I will also create one here. I'll call this a post. I'll call this, I'll just let it be a create by ID for now. But let's just see if everything works. All right, so I have an error in user.js in my controllers on line number 10. Why do I have an error? So I have an object, line number 10. Ah, so probably this. Okay, so hopefully everything should still work. And yes, it does work. It does work. All right. So generally, we have some certain conventions. These are called REST API conventions. By default, the slash out will get you all of the records for a particular uh, controller. So for example, if you're creating routes for user, by default, this dot get slash will get me all of the records for user. Dot get slash ID will just get me one user. And then we have this post method. Post methods are used to create new resources uh, in your database. Right now, we're not using database for this video, but again, as I've said, this is a series of videos uh, intentionally built for creating a chat application. So I will talk about databases, particularly Mongo's, NoSQL databases. Anyways, so post is a method uh, in which we will in which user sends us some data, and what we generally do is we create a resource in our database. So what I'll just call this, I'll call this create user. I'll come here, I'll say user request response next similar things, and then I will just, you know, I'll just come up here, and then what I will do here is, so I expect some certain things from the user when he hits this API. I expect him to send a first name, last name, and ID, for example, and then I would say const user payload. I love the word payload for some reason. Uh, First name, last name, ID. ID should be at the top. No, Control X, and ID should also be in the start. All right. Job well done. And then I'll say data is equal to user payload. All right. Now, if I come here and I have a post, I call this. Oh, also, sorry, one thing that I did by mistake. Since this is a new creation of a resource by conventions, this does not have an ID because an ID doesn't exist for it. All right, so let me restart my server, and this is the last time I'm restarting up my server manually. After this, I'll do a thing called I'll use a thing called notemon, which will automatically restart my server every time I change my code. Again, super nice. All right, so I have this user. I'll just go up in my body, raw JSON, and for those people who are coming from a very new background, I will ensure I'll just start typing it here. I have to talk about, I have to share up a link for course destructuring, as I've said in my video. And also I'll try to find up a nice good resource, whether it's a video or a nice tutorial as to what Postman is and how you can use it to call for APIs. It does a lot more than that, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to talk about them. So Adil, last name is Imran, and then I have an ID. I'll just call this one. All right, let's see if this works. Okay, so I've got an error. Let's see what this error is about. Cannot destructure as it is undefined. All right, so what I did was, this was on purpose. What I did was I tried sending some data to the user from my API endpoint, but it didn't accept that. That's because our server doesn't know and how to handle that. So from our set of utilities, I will come up here, and then I will do express.json. So this does express that all the data that you can get in your API, you can get it, you're allowed to get it in a format for JSON. And I'll just go up just one more step ahead, and what I will do is express URL encoded. I'll say extended is equal to true. So this just talked about. What this will do is, right now we don't have anything like that, and I'm not planning on creating anything similar to this. But what extended true does is, it tells Express that you can accept a JSON in a nested format. So I don't know. I'll say body. I don't know why this head came to my mind. Head is it is a it is a face. I don't know. I'm being very silly. But what this does is, it tells Express that all the body that you're getting, you can get it in a nested JSON structure. That is what extended true is for. I'm not going to use it, but I've still set it to true. Now, if I if I restart my server again and hit this, all right, it does all of these things. It just it doesn't do actually a lot. It just takes in whatever the user is sending in the body, and we make it into an object and just throw it out. So nothing much done there. Last resource is, it's called a ID. I'm not going to talk about that because the internals are almost the same. It's a delete resource. So again, since we're deleting something, we know that it exists. So it has the same conventions as slash colon ID. So delete something by an ID. Now, similar to post, we have something called put. Put is used for updating a resource. So while post was used to create a new resource, once we have that new resource, and for example, I have a username, and I don't know, my ID is 1, and I want to change it to, I don't know, 75. I will use a put resource. I will enter in my current user ID, and I will, using that ID, I will make a database operation. I will find a record with that ID and then update whatever I want to update. So generally, every route should have these five set of routes. It's called get slash, which means get me all of the resources for users. Get slash ID, get me one user. Post slash, create up a new user resource. Put slash ID, find me an ID with this particular resource, and whatever data that I'm sending in my body, after it's been validated into the controller, update it into the database, and then just update me with the status. And then the last is delete slash ID. I have this ID, I'll give it to you. If it exists, delete it after performing whatever necessary validations that you have. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about here were certain validations. So for example, if I were to go here back, and instead of doing first name, I did first name with capital D's. And if I came here, it doesn't do anything of those things. So I haven't talked a lot about validations, but again, this is going to be a series of videos, a huge tutorial for creating a Pichard application. So I will talk about on how you can validate a user body before touching your database, because you don't want corrupted data going into your database, right? Anyways, this was it. For this video, we talked about Express, we talked about cores, We talked about destructuring. We also talked about adding logs into our server as we make API calls. We talked about routes. We talked about controllers. We talked about some REST API conventions. Get, post, put, delete, and obviously there are like tons of them. So if you would come here, there's like unlock, purge, unlink, options, patch, but I'm not going to talk about them because generally we only use these four things that I mentioned. And what else did we talk about? um, we talked about express.json, so how you can allow express to uh, permit user to send in JSON in their API request. We talked about oh, I'm sorry. So one thing that we missed throughout all of this was ensuring that we don't have to start our server again. So since I have this package called nodemon installed, um, what I will just come up here, I'll say nodemon server.js, and then I'll have this start server. So maybe I'm deploying something on a server and I don't want it to be restarted again and again. So I'll just keep this as it is. Now, if I come here and do npm run start, just see what happens. Just wait and watch. All right, it did a lot of those things. So I'm just going to come up here instead of saying job well done, I'm going to say job very well done. I don't know if that's even proper English or not, but I don't have to restart my server again, but it just updated on its own. And now if I come here and I type in Pikachu, oh, sorry, it's a GET request. And if I do, it says job very well done. So now moving forward, we don't even have to restart our server. So we've talked about nodemon as well. And that's pretty much it. Have a good day. Have a look at the description for this video as well. Bye, guys.